In I'm doing this because you had talked about equicontinuity and uniform convergence on compact sets. Okay, and the limit function is continuous. In that case, we are talking about holomorphicity here. So this is quite closely related to ideas that you have seen in the topology class. And that is why it is quite appropriate to talk about it here. So I hope you have the time. It's time. We can start. Okay. Any questions so far? No questions. I should wait for a minute or two to make you think about questions. No. Okay, so one of you had asked me, where do you use this Montel's theorem about uniform boundedness of a family on compact sets? If the family is holomorphic, then that business has you get the limit to be, equicontinuity. First you prove that it is equicontinuous, and then you prove that it's a normal family. Every sequence has a convergent subsequence that converges uniformly on every compact subset. So let me just remind you that again. And one of you had asked me, where are we going to use it? So we are going to use it right now in the proof of the Riemann mapping theorem. And as I had said very often, these ideas have come out of the proof of the Riemann mapping theorem. Okay, so where were we? So this page 83, I think I should just remind you of, what is this? I should just remind you of this Montel's theorem. Okay, which says if you have a family of holomorphic functions that are uniformly bounded on compact subsets, then it is equicontinuous on every compact subset. Okay. And the proof of that was just a proof of that was you have done this for a family on one compact subset, and then because it is uniformly bounded, you can get it on any compact subset. So this was the proof that we had done last time. You must understand that in all these things, it is very instructive to draw a diagram. What is your delta? What is 2 delta? What is 3 delta? Where are z and where is omega? And what do you know about fz minus f omega? Okay. So you have to sort of figure out exactly what is a diagram that you have to draw. Okay. So in fact, the diagram should essentially tell you what the proof is. Okay. So I'm not going to go through this proof. I've gone through it twice already. And what I had done here was for one function, and we understood that this bound B that we are getting was for that one function. But if the bound B is true for all the elements in that function, in that family F, capital script F, and then you get this uniform thing for every family in that script F uniformly. Okay. So uniformly bounded on compact sets, equicontinuous on a compact set. Okay. And if F is a family of holomorphic functions that are uniformly bounded on compact subsets, then SF is equicontinuous on every compact subset. Okay, that is what we had. This equicontinuous, you must remember, it's equicontinuous on the set, on every compact subset. So that means that you have to fix the compact subset, and then you get your epsilon delta business. Okay. And as the compact subset changes, given epsilon, the delta will change. Okay. And for all epsilon greater than 0, there exists a delta, blah, 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 which depends on epsilon. And what I'm saying is that the delta also depends on the set K on which you're talking about. As K varies, the delta will vary. Okay. And so first it is equicontinuous. Okay. This was part A. And then in part B, again, here there was a diagram involved about how you get this exhaustion. And that diagram again should tell you much more than, and once you see the diagram, you should be able to understand what the statement is. So there was an exercise here that I had told you to do. The only thing that is not quite as straightforward is to show that Kn is contained in interior of Kn plus 1. And as I said, this has something to do with the triangle inequality. Okay. Such a family is called an exhaustion. What is a normal family? If every sequence of functions has a subsequence, it converges uniformly on every compact subset. The limit function need not be in F. So as I said, write down a epsilon delta for all their exist statement. I hope you have done it. Probably haven't, but anyway. F is a family of holomorphic functions uniformly bounded on compact subsets of omega. This was the same assumption that I had earlier. And therefore, I know that it is equicontinuous. Then F is a normal family. Okay, what I want to show is that it converges uniformly on every compact subset. So what? You take a dense family, a dense omega is separable, and therefore you take a dense set, that fix a compact subset, then you take a subsequence which converges at one point, subsequence converges at the second point, subsequence that converges at the rth point, okay, subsequence of the subsequence of the subsequence, etc., which converges at the rth point, and then you take the diagonal part. Okay, then this converges for each j, and f is equicontinuous on every subset of omega, and therefore this gn's, okay, gn converges uniformly on k, and this is follows from your 3 epsilon argument. Okay, but then you also want to say that it converges uniformly on every compact subset, and therefore you have a exhaustion. And if you take any compact subset is contained in one of these kns. If k is any compact subset, k is contained in kn naught for some n naught. Why? Because the interiors of kns are increasing, they're open, and they're going to cover omega, and therefore they cover every compact subset. So interior kns cover any compact subset. Therefore, it has a finite subcover where the kns are increasing. Therefore, one element is going to cover that kn compact set that you're given. And you take this, you can do this for K1, K2, and so on, and Kr. And therefore, this sequence is going to converge for every compact subset. Okay, so this again, there's something to be done here. It's not particularly difficult. Let's just think about it. And then this was the other thing, other ingredient I needed, which said that if you have a connected set and you have a sequence of injective holomorphic functions which converge uniformly on every compact subset, then the limit function is holomorphic, and the limit function is either injective. So the limit of a sequence of holomorphic functions, okay, which converge uniformly on every compact subset, is either injective or is constant. They're the two extremes that it can possibly have. And this was a consequence of that argument principle. Okay, something is converging uniformly, etc., etc. Okay, so then I had done a bit of this, and this is the first statement that I needed, which is that if you have something that is simply connected and not the whole of C, okay, then I want to say that that omega is biholomorphically equivalent to an open subset of the unit disk. The idea was that you have a point which is not in omega. So z minus alpha is nowhere zero on the whole of omega. Omega is simply connected. You have a nowhere zero, nowhere vanishing holomorphic function on omega. Therefore, I can define the log. Okay, fz is log z minus alpha, e to the fz is z minus alpha, and therefore f is 1 to 1. Now you take any point. This is what is kind of weird about this geometry. It doesn't matter which W you choose. Choose any point W which is not equal to Z. Okay. So choose any point W naught. It's a fixed point. Fz is not equal to Fw plus 2 pi I. Okay. And the claim is that you can find, so Fw is never Fz is never Fw plus 2 pi I. This is where that log business is coming in. The exponential of the log is the function. Okay. There's some weird geometry that is going on here. Fz is not equal to Fw plus 2 pi I. But not just Fz is not equal to that, Fz is far away from this. Okay. So no matter which W you choose, okay, the remaining images, f of z for z not equal to w's z in omega, the remaining images, okay, are far away from Fw plus 2 pi I, no matter which W you choose. And what do I mean by far away? I mean, I can find a disk around Fw plus 2 pi I so that no value of f on omega gets within that disk. And just think about it, this is weird, no? I mean, z varies over all of omega. W is any point. So if I choose any point W, look at Fw plus 2 pi I. And what I'm saying is Fz is far away from Fw plus 2 pi I. Far away, what do I mean by that? It is at least at some distance delta. Obviously, the delta here is going to depend on the W that you choose. Okay, it's not going to depend on the Z. The delta is going to depend on the W that you choose. So as W changes, the delta will change. But if you fix a W naught, then there exists this ball around Fz plus 2 pi I of radius delta, which is not in the image of F. Okay, this is very weird. I mean, if you just think about it, you're saying that no matter which W you choose, Fz is far away from Fw plus 2 pi I by at least a distance delta, which depends on W. Okay. So why not? Why? Suppose it is not true, then I'm claiming that first claim is not true. That means what? For all delta greater than 0, there exists a z in omega such that Fz is in ball center Fw radius 2 pi I. All of you realize that, no? When I say that this claim is not true, if I say the claim is not true, it means that for all delta greater than 0, there exists a z in omega such that Fz is in ball center Fw plus 2 pi I radius delta. That means Fz lies in this ball. So I will choose for all delta, I can find a z. So I will choose delta equal to 1 by n, and I can find a Fzn in the ball center Fw plus 2 pi I radius 1 by n. Okay, and therefore that says that Fzn converges to Fw plus 2 pi I. Okay, that means that Zn is going to converge to W. But if Zn converges to W, Fzn should converge to Fw. But Fzn is converging to Fw plus 2 pi I, and this is a contradiction. Okay, so this statement is true. There exists a delta such that this is empty, and therefore this distance fz minus fw plus 2 pi I when z varies over omega. That distance is at least delta. Therefore, 1 over fz is less than or equal to 1 over delta, which is some positive number. That means f is going to be holomorphic because it's 1 over a holomorphic function which is far away from 0. F is holomorphic, f is bounded, okay, and f is 1 to 1 because capital F is 1 to 1. F is holomorphic, bounded, and open. And therefore, f from omega to f omega is biholomorphic, and therefore you scale it, you get it within the disk. So this is where we were last time. Even though I'm repeating myself, as I always say, it is good to repeat. So what is the Riemann mapping theorem? If you have a proper, simply connected, open subset of omega, and you fix any point in omega, then there exists a unique biholomorphic map f from omega to d, such that f of z0 is that fixed point is 0, which maps z0 to 0, and whose derivative at z0 is positive. And we had this uniqueness, which was following quite easily. It's just that because we know what every automorphism of the disk is, uniqueness follows from our understanding of automorphisms of the disk. And the next statement is that the conditions are necessary because if omega was the whole of C and f is a holomorphic map from C to D, that means it is a bounded holomorphic map. That means it must be a constant. And you must put omega to be simply connected, because if you want a biholomorphism from here to here, you know that this is simply connected, D is simply connected, and therefore omega must be simply connected. Okay. So we want to show that. So now we want to prove the Riemann mapping theorem. Omega is proper and simply connected. There exists a unique biholomorphic map which maps omega to D. Fz naught is this. So a proper, simply connected open set. Okay. What have we said? What did we do earlier? What we have just said earlier is that if you have a proper subset of C that is simply connected, why do I need simply connected? I need simply connected because I want to define log. Okay. Omega is proper, simply connected, then I can assume that omega is, what I proved is that omega is biholomorphically equivalent to an open subset of the unit disk, which contains the origin. Okay. So if I start with any omega that is proper and simply connected, I can do this biholomorphism and assume that omega itself can be identified with its image. That means I can assume that omega is a subset of the unit disk which contains 0, okay, in the interior. I mean, 0 is in omega is contained in unit disk, and omega is open, and omega is simply connected. So the first step is that without loss of generality by the previous result, we can assume that omega is an open subset of the unit disk and 0 is in omega. What does this mean? This means that the identity map fz equal to z, id z equal to z, okay? This map is injective, it is 1 to 1, it maps 0 to 0, and the derivative at 0 is 1. Okay? So there exists this injective map from omega to D, okay, whose derivative at 0 is 1. What I want to do is find among all these maps which satisfy the fact that the injective, which maps 0 to 0, and whose identity, whose derivative at z equal to 0 is 1, as derivative at z equal to 0 is positive. Okay. Among all these, I want to choose one of them. And this is where this idea is actually, it's a very beautiful idea. So I take all these functions from omega to D, which are holomorphic, injective, and which map 0 to 0. I'm going to talk about this family. So the first thing I have to be sure is that this family is non-empty. Okay, because I mean, I think I remember somewhere Professor Nitsure was also talking about this, that everything is true for the empty set. Okay, because there's nothing for which it is not true. Did Nitsure say something like this? Where am I? Where is my? Yeah. You have to be sure every time that the set you're talking about is non-empty. Okay. Why? Because everything is true for the non-empty set. Was there something like this done in the beginning of the topology class when Professor Nitsure was talking about category theory and some things and whatever? I mean, at every stage, you must be sure that what you're talking about has some content. Yes or no? I believe he did talk something like this, no? All elephants with yellow tails sing. Is this statement true or false? Come on, someone should respond now.
Is it true?
Huh?
Is it true?
Is it true? All elephants with yellow tails can sing, rag Yaman. Is this true?
Is it true? Because there are no elephants with yellow tails, so there is nothing to check.
Do you understand this? I mean, every statement about an empty set is true because there's no place where it is not true. Okay. So I think something like this was talked about. I was there in one of the lectures, and I vaguely recall that Nitsure had talked something like this when he was talking about category theory. Is that correct? Had he said something like this? That I mean, if you're talking about something, you must be pretty sure that what you're talking about is not the empty set.
When the disconnectedness we discussed.
You did something like this now once. Where did you talk about it, Rahul?
When we discussed about disconnectedness of the sets,
Ah,
empty set is connected.
ah, hmm.
That time
Something like
we
that.
used that.
I think he said it a couple of times, is what I recall. Okay. So the point here is that at every stage, whenever you're talking about something, okay, you have to be sure that that family or whatever you're talking about is non-empty. Okay. This is part of your part of the thing before you can go ahead and go anywhere further. Okay. So the point here is that look at this family: holomorphic, injective, and F0 equal to 0. Family of holomorphic functions which map 0 to 0, which are injective from omega to d. Okay. The first statement I must make sure about is that this family is non-empty. Okay. And I have just told you that this family is non-empty because the identity, it can be called the identity map. It can also be called it should not be called the identity map. It should be called the inclusion map. Okay. So I shouldn't have called it ID. I should have called it IN. Okay. ID is a bad notation because identity map is not quite right. I should have called it the inclusion map from omega to d. This is where I'm assuming that omega is a open subset of d that contains 0. Okay. So the inclusion map at z is equal to z is the map from omega to d. Okay. In your topology class also, this inclusion maps had some names. Yes, what is it called? Categorically, what are these inclusion maps supposed to be? I believe somewhere here you had talked about that there. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Let's go ahead. Okay. So the inclusion map is an F. Therefore, the F family F is non-empty. Okay. My claim is that this family F is uniformly bounded on compact sets. Okay. So what I know is that you have this omega, you have 0 is an omega, and omega is open and it's contained in the disk. So this line here is supposed to be the disk. Inside the disk, I have an omega, and inside omega, I have the origin. And because omega is open and the origin is in omega, I can find this disk like this. Okay. So there exists a eta such that the ball center eta radius 0 is contained in omega. And for F in the family F, F prime 0, okay, is less than or equal to 1 over 2 pi I integral log gamma. This is your Cauchy formula for the derivatives and higher order derivatives. So F prime 0 is less than or equal to 1 over eta. Okay. As F varies over all elements of F. Okay. So this shows that F prime 0 is uniformly bounded for F in F. Okay. F prime 0 is uniformly bounded by some bound. Okay. I don't really care what the bound is. I want to say that it is bounded by some number, 10 to the 53, whatever that number is. Okay, it's a finite number. We want to choose an F which starts out as fast as possible at Z equal to 0. Okay. And this is what I mean, that the velocity of that function at Z equal to 0 must be the highest possible. That means, I mean, again, you have to, I'm talking loosely, what do I mean by velocity here? What I mean is that the rate of change at 0 should be maximum, whatever I mean by rate of change. So what I want is that F prime of 0 should be as large as possible. This is what I meant by saying that, you know, you have a cricket bat or cricket ball and you want the ball to go as far as you can, and therefore the ball must be hit with the largest possible speed. Yes, only then you can only hit a sixer if your ball is hit with a large speed. Yes, so I want that F prime at 0 should be as large as possible. So you want to choose an S, but you see, your F prime of 0 cannot be infinitely large, because then, of course, if it is infinitely large, okay, how do you choose the largest if the thing that the largest is infinitely large? But I know that F prime of 0 is bounded by some number, 10 to the 23, whatever I find that 1 over eta to be. Okay, so if you have everything is bounded by some eta, okay, and therefore you know that every set that is bounded above has a greatest lower bound, and you can find a sequence that converges to that. So where are we? So you take the supremum, you take the maximum possible speeds, you take the maximum possible initial speeds at 0 of the functions in F. Supremum, F prime of 0, these are the maximum possible speeds at 0 for a function in F, and look at the supremum of all these numbers. Okay, supremum is finite, and supremum is less than 1 over eta. Okay, and I also know that the supremum is greater than 1. Why is it greater than 1? Why is that supremum greater than 1? But what did I make a fuss about just now? I said that I already know one function in that family F. to show that that family F, script F, is non-empty. What is that family? What is that function?
Inclusion map.
Is the inclusion map. So one of those functions there is the inclusion map. What is the derivative of the inclusion map at z equal to 0?
It is 1.
It is 1. Fz in of z equal to z, in prime of z at z equal to 0 is 1. Okay. So in those numbers that I have there, in these numbers that I have here, f prime of 0, okay, the particular f which is the inclusion map is here. So for that particular inclusion map, f prime of 0 is 1. So 1 is one of the numbers in these things. Therefore, the supremum must be greater than 1. Okay, and the supremum is finite because the supremum is less than 1 over eta is what I've just shown here. Okay, whatever this eta is, that ball. Okay, so supremum is less than 1 over eta and supremum is greater than 1. So keep this, I've written this somewhere down. Supremum is greater than 1 and it is less than 1 over eta. So this is the supremum of that family. Therefore, I can find a sequence of functions in f such that f prime of 0 in absolute value converges to s, you know, as n tends to infinity. And each, I can say that f prime of 0, each of them is less than or equal to s. Therefore, this sequence, so this sequence fn's, remember all these sequence, all these functions fn's have value where? All these are in script f. F has values where? F has values in D. Okay. That means mod f of z is less than or equal to 1 for all f in f and for all z in D. Sorry. Mod f of z is less than 1 for all f in f and for all z in omega. Therefore, this family script f is uniformly bounded on compact subsets of omega. In fact, they're bounded by 1. Yes, this family script f is bounded by 1 everywhere. Forget about uniform business. In particular, the family script f is uniformly bounded on compact subsets of omega. Given any compact subset of omega, okay, there exists some bound so that f of z is less than or equal to that bound for all z in that compact subset. But it doesn't matter which compact subset you choose because all the images of all the f's are in D. Therefore, the images are bounded by 1. Fz is bounded by 1, therefore it's uniformly bounded on compact subsets of omega. S is greater than or equal to 1. I've just told you, I had written y. I shouldn't have told you why s is greater than or equal to 1. And s is less than or equal to 1 over eta. So 1 less than or equal to s less than or equal to 1 over eta. So therefore, I can apply Montel's theorem, 2 parts of the Montel's theorem. So the sequence has a subsequence that converges uniformly on compact subsets of omega to a holomorphic function f on omega. Okay, but each of those elements in that subsequence are in f. All the elements in f are injective and they map 0 to 0. Hey, bapre, something went wrong. What went wrong? Still there. Can you see me? Can you see this?
Yes, sir. Yes.
You can see, no? So it's not been disconnected yet. Okay. So each Fn is injective. I mean, the sequence Fn's that I'm finding are uniformly bounded. Therefore, it has a subsequence that converges uniformly on every compact subset to omega of omega. Each element is injective. Therefore, the limit of the sequence subsequence is either injective or it is constant. Okay? But S is greater than 1. So the derivative at 0 is greater than 1. Therefore, the limit is not constant. The limit of this subsequence is not constant, because if it were constant, the derivative at 0 would be 0. Okay? So f is non-constant, each fn is injective, the limit of the sequence, namely f, is injective, as each fn is less than or equal to 1, therefore fz is less than or equal to 1, and by the maximum modulus theorem, for all z in omega, fz must be strictly less than 1. Because omega is open and the maximum cannot occur at an interior point. Okay? If there exists some z0 in omega so that fz0 in mod is equal to 1, then you're saying the maximum occurs at an interior point and therefore f is constant. Fn of 0 is 0, that means f of 0 is 0, and therefore there exists an f in f with f prime 0 equal to s is greater than 1. Claim is that f is your required biholomorphism from omega to d. F is holomorphic, non-constant, into d, and is 1, 1, and f0 equal to 0. So f is an open map because it's holomorphic, and f from omega to f omega is holomorphic. What have I written there? So f is an open map, f from this should be holomorphic. I want to show that f is biholomorphic. But right now I'm saying that f from, what I've written is correct. F from omega to f of omega, to the image, it is onto the image. And therefore it is onto the image, it is biholomorphic, onto the image. My claim is that the image is the whole of D. Okay. So I want to claim that f of omega is the whole of D. Suppose this is not true. Okay. Suppose this is not true. That means f is not surjective. Then I want to get a contradiction. What contradiction am I going to get? What was the property about this particular f that I have found? The f that I have found is such that, where am I? F is an f with f prime 0 equal to s. And what was s? S was the maximum of all possible f prime zeros in f. Okay? S was the maximum of all f primes of zeros as you vary over functions in script f. So the contradiction I'm going to get here is that I'm going to construct a function which I call f tilde, which is an f whose derivative at 0 is strictly greater than s. This will be a contradiction. It's a contradiction to what? It's a contradiction to f prime at 0 is s, and s is the maximum such. Okay, it's a finite number, it's a maximum such. So you're saying that the maximum of some quantity, f prime of 0, is 25. Now I'm telling you that I'm going to construct a function such that its maximum and such that its derivative of 0 is 26. But then the previous thing would not be the maximum. And therefore you'll have a contradiction because I'm starting off with the fact that it's a maximum. Okay, so why? Suppose f is not surjective. There exists a point in D which is not in the image of alpha, which is not in the image of f. Then you define this thing which takes alpha to 0. Define this automorphism of D. So this is where I'm needing all this business about automorphism. Define this automorphism of D, which maps alpha to 0. Okay, so you have omega to f omega, and from f omega I go to D. Okay, psi alpha is an homomorphism, but psi alpha restricted to f omega will give you psi alpha of f omega. Okay, and this is maybe something smaller than, this is presumably something smaller than the whole of D. Okay, but it's an open set, so I call it U. Omega is simply connected. Psi alpha composed with f goes from omega to U. Okay, and so when psi alpha composed with f from omega to U is biholomorphic, the image, remember, I'm restricting to U. So this U, omega is simply connected. This image is a biholomorphism, and therefore the image is simply connected. U equal to psi alpha of f of omega is simply connected, and 0 is not in U. Psi alpha of eta is equal to 0 means eta is equal to alpha. That means, but alpha is not in f of omega. So U is simply connected and 0 is not in U. So we can define log on U. It's a simply connected region, and this map is it's a simply connected region, and 0 is not in that simply connected region. So I can define log, and therefore I can define a square root. How do you define the square root? G of W equal to e to the 1/2 log W. I can define log correctly because it's simply connected and 0 is not in there. And therefore I can define e to the 1/2 log W, and e to the 1/2 log W by definition is W to the 1/2. So G is well defined. Okay. Define f to be, you take f, psi alpha, take the square root, and then you do this automorphism of G alpha. F maps omega to D. Why? F maps, little f maps omega to f of U. Psi alpha is going to map that D to itself. G itself will map everything in D to D, and psi alpha again maps D to D. So f maps omega to D, and f of 0 is psi of G alpha composed with G composed with psi alpha composed with f of 0. So alpha G is psi alpha of 0. F of 0 is 0. Psi alpha of 0 is alpha. G of alpha, psi G alpha of G of alpha is 0. So f of 0 is 0. F maps omega to D, each component maps into D, and f is injective. These are injections, f and g are injections, so capital F is an injection. Let h be the square function, h of omega equal to omega squared. Then, I'm inverting this. What am I inverting? I'm inverting this. So f is equal to f composed on the left by psi g alpha inverse, composed by g inverse, which is my h, which is the square, composed by psi alpha inverse. Psi alpha inverse composed with h, composed with psi g alpha inverse composed with f, which is phi composed with f. Phi maps d to d, phi of 0 is 0, phi is not injective, okay, as h is not injective, okay. By Schwartz lemma, so it maps d to d and phi of 0 is 0, therefore phi prime of 0 is less than 1, Schwartz lemma. But f prime of 0 is phi prime of 0, f prime of 0, which is phi prime of f of 0, which is phi prime of 0, f prime at 0. I have a problem here. What have I called? I've called it big F. It's okay. F prime at 0. Okay. So f prime at 0 is greater than little f prime of 0. So you get something. So big F. Where do I have big F? Big F maps omega to D. Okay. Big F is injective and big F of 0 is 0. Where have I written that? Big F of 0 is 0. It maps omega to D and and it is injective. So I have found therefore big F is in script F. So I have found this function in script F whose derivative at 0 is strictly greater than the derivative of F prime at 0. Okay. This is a contradiction. Therefore, the image must be the whole of D. Okay. It's quite an amazing proof. The components are quite easy. But of course, the whole point is that how do you put all these things together? Okay. So there's a lot to think about here. Yeah. And you have to understand how exactly one is using each of those things that we needed. Okay. And it's worthwhile to spend some time understanding what the proof is. Now, you should also see this proof from different books. For example, the way it's done in Conway, the idea is essentially the same, but it is not written so cleanly in some sense. Conway is much more thorough. It fills up all the details and things like that. But the main idea is sort of somewhat hidden in Conway. Whereas in this book of Stein and Shakarchi, this is all there in Stein and Shakarchi. This idea is extremely clean. Okay. So I would strongly urge you to spend time trying to understand what this idea is, to go through this proof. Okay. Where are we using all these Montel's theorem and uniform convergence on compact sets, having a convergent subsequence which converges uniformly on every compact subset, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So I'm using all those results in order to prove this. So I mean, this has quite a few consequences, but on the other hand, as you will understand, the proof that we are giving is not a constructive proof. So it doesn't tell you that given this region, which is simply connected and does not cover the whole of C, how do you find that homomorphism, biholomorphism between that region and D? Okay. So you know that it exists, but how do you find it? Okay. And this comes to some very interesting questions of actually finding the biholomorphism. Now, in this book by Stein and Shakarchi, they sort of tell you one way of doing it is, of course, I mean, we have done some examples like this. Okay. For particular functions, particular regions, we have found this biholomorphism to the unit disk. That is what all that business was going on in the beginning of about a week ago or so. Okay. When I was telling you this region maps to that region by this particular map, and then this is a biholomorphism between here and there and those kind of things. So you know how to find this biholomorphism in particular cases. But then how do you do it in general? How can you find it in general? And then, of course, you have to ask questions about what is the boundary behavior of this biholomorphisms that you get. So for a particular case where the region that you're talking about in C is polygonal, that means the region is bounded by a polygon figure with straight edges, there is a way of saying what this biholomorphism is. And that actually is useful in a lot of places in hydrodynamics and fluid mechanics and things like that. Those are what are called the Schwarz-Christoffel symbols. Okay, and we have seen one particular example of it. But I mean, Stein and Shakarchi do talk about this. I hope some of you will read this business about the Schwarz-Christoffel symbols. And it turns out that these Schwarz-Christoffel symbols are actually quite useful, quite important in, again, as one says, usually a large part of mathematics. Differential equations, solutions of, not heat equation, but solutions of the wave equation and various things like that on different domains. So it is quite interesting to see what one should be doing there. They also arise in number theory when one is talking about, okay, theta functions in some sense. Okay, so now I think what I'll do now is for the next few lectures, I'll do a little bit about Fourier analysis, and then I will start talking about the gamma function and the zeta function. And I hope I'll be able to prove the recurrence formula for the zeta function. Okay, so those of you, so who are all the people here? I wonder if I can recognize them. Are there, how many people are there who are in my zeta function class? 1, 2, 3. But are these people who are there in this? Five, 6. So 6 or 7 of you are in my other class also. So the rest of the people are not attending. So anyway, I want to sort of do something with zeta functions that are there, and because that should be interesting to the people in the other class I'm teaching right now. And unfortunately, it seems that about 5 or 6 of them are coming here, though I told you all to attend, but people must be busy. So anyway, I'll talk a little bit about Fourier analysis, then I'll talk about zeta functions and gamma functions and theta functions. Okay, and how you get, for example, the recurrence formulas kind of thing. Okay, but that'll be later. Okay, so I should stop here now. It's nearly time. I'm stopping a few minutes earlier, but this is a good place to stop. Any questions?